You can now stream the forbidden documentary Occult Louisiana free on Tubi TV. Hello friends, we are in a troubling time when it comes to misinformation. The views of our guests do not reflect that of my own. This show is for entertainment purposes only, and any information presented during this show is a live-action role-play scenario. All that being said, enjoy this episode. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Cory Hughes. First, check out Brainsupreme. Brainsupreme does contain the highest quality ingredients, so you can start your microdosing journey right now. Visit their website by using the link right in the description, and you'll get 15% off your entire order. Also, check out the Forbidden documentary Occult Louisiana. That's available on Tubi and multiple platforms. Get a Rokfin premium membership, rokfin.com/FKN+. We are booking guests for January. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome back to the show Cory Hughes. He is author of A Warning from History, host of Bloody History, and co-host of Day Zero. Cory, welcome back. How you doing?
Excellent. Appreciate your having me on today, and Merry Christmas to everyone out there.
Yes, Merry Christmas, everyone. Today we're going to once again share your JFK assassination research, which has uncovered very interesting new pieces of evidence surrounding Oswald, or I should say Oswalds. We gave an introduction to this research in previous episodes, but you have new information to share with a presentation. Very excited to share this with everyone. Before we get started, just remind the audience where they can find you.
Sure, CoryHughes.org, and the podcast is Cory Hughes Bloody History. And if you're interested in World War II, my Substack is Bloody History World War II. So those are the best places to find me. Right on.
Well, as we pull up your presentation, give us a brief synopsis of what you're going to show us today.
Sure. So when I got back into doing the real hardcore research, which for me is all encompassing, I've been literally putting in like 12-hour days for the last 2 months. And that's kind of how it was when I got started with my initial research. But that stint lasted 3 years. That was a pretty wild time. And that was all when I gathered all the information for my first book. But the biggest piece of the puzzle that no one has really figured out is, who the hell is Lee Harvey Oswald? Really, who is he? And unfortunately, nobody knows. Anybody out there who claims to be an expert on Oswald is kidding themselves. The level of outright contradictory information on Oswald is unbelievable, and it led a researcher named John Armstrong into researching the possibility that there were actually two Oswalds. And his research uncovered so many discrepancies and weird overlaps in timing and places that they lived that he came to the absolute conclusion there were two Oswalds. One of them actually went by the name of Harvey Oswald, and the other one went by Lee Oswald. Now, on its face, it sounds utterly ridiculous, but one has to really put it in context of a post-World War II CIA knowing they're about to engage the Soviet Union in an extended Cold War, possibly a hot war. And what were they going to be willing to do to get a spy into the Soviet Union? Now, a lot of people I talk to who know something about the CIA will completely admit that the CIA has killed tens of millions of people in covert wars. They've experimented on people MK Ultra style and done mind control and all kinds of crazy stuff. Then when you bring up the topic that there were two Lee Harvey Oswalds, they look at you like you're crazy. Like the idea that people who would engage in MK Ultra and the murder of 10 million people through covert wars, like as if they would not raise a duplicate child as part of a covert operation to get a spy into the Soviet Union. To me, it's one of the most mundane programs that they possibly could have had. Also, when you look at the way that they handled this particular program, which you can clearly say was a program, because Oswald was unquestionably managed at some level from the time that he was a child. You will find that as you go through each individual address of Oswald, going back to 1947, the first year of the CIA, what you'll find is that you have weird anomalies that cannot be explained. You have weird delays, right? So you'll have him move from one school to another because he moved locations, but then you'll find he didn't move out of that location for 6 more months, right? You'll find weird things like that. You'll find overlaps that shouldn't occur for any reason. And so in trying to dissect John Armstrong's work, not necessarily to affirm or deny it, but just to see what he's getting at, some of the information you come across is absolutely stunning. And there's no way to explain it other than there was a second person involved. I'll give you a great example. I'm currently in the process of examining Oswald while he's in New York City in the period of allegedly August of 1952 through January of 1954. You've got about a year and a half, a little more there, where he's documented as having gone to the Trinity Lutheran School when he first got there in late 52. Then he goes to PS 117. Then he allegedly goes to PS 44 in the Bronx. But I have evidence that he actually went to PS 47 in the Bronx, PS 44 in Manhattan, and I've recently discovered another document showing he was at PS 611 in the Bronx, which was a school for troubled kids. So the official story says he was at 3 schools. I've got records of him being at 3 different schools. I don't know how to meld this information, okay? Then simultaneously in the August of 1953, we have numerous witnesses who put Lee Harvey Oswald in Stanley, North Dakota. Not just one, not just two. We have at least 3 or 4 witnesses who put Oswald in North Dakota in late 53. So as you move into 1954, Oswald will at some point leave from New York and will go to New Orleans, where he will attend Beauregard Junior High School. And the problem here is that we can clearly put somebody going to school under the name Lee Harvey Oswald at Beauregard in January of 1954, where they had a good school record, they had good grades and all that stuff. However, we cannot put Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans until May of 1954. So we have a 5-month residency gap where I have records of him going to school. The address he used when he was going to school at Beauregard in the beginning was the address of Oswald's aunt, Lillian Moret, who lived in New Orleans. But as per Lillian, they never lived there, right? So they just used her address to get Oswald into school in January of 54. But Oswald doesn't have a place to live until May of 54. So we have this 5-month period with a lot of contradiction. And this brings us to an address called 126 Exchange Place, which is right in the heart of the French Quarter. And despite the fact the official story says that Oswald didn't move in there till around May of 1955, there's evidence showing Oswald had been living there since January of 1954. And the evidence of him staying there from January 54 until about May of 1955 they have gone to great lengths to suppress this information. So how do you interpret things like this? How do you interpret the idea that Oswald was both in New Orleans and not in New Orleans? See, so in New York, let me just comment on this before we get to the slideshow. In New York, at the end of this time period, January 54, I'm going through all the records and I find another set of records that are completely foreign to me, but have a lot of the same information from the school stuff. And I'm digging through it, and it clearly said that Oswald was taken into custody in April of 1953, like by the probation board, the school board in New York City, because if you don't go to school, you get arrested. That's how it went back then. And so I have a document that says that he was kept in custody until March of 1954. So basically, I just found a document after going through all this stuff that kind of shows that he was actually in custody for about 9 months But simultaneously, while he's in custody, we have a Lee Oswald going to school at PS 44, where he seems to have a near perfect attendance record. But the documentation of him in custody shows PS 611, right? So I've got more schools than are alleged to have ever been there that he's ever supposed to have been in, that I'm trying to meld the differences, right? And so I've done a pretty good job in some of his early life. Like in the early 1940s, his mother was supposed to have lived in Algiers, Louisiana, where she worked at a Navy base. This had to have been a slip. She worked as a telephone operator at a Navy base in Algiers. Now, was there a Navy base in Algiers? Well, sort of. It was an internment camp for Japanese back in the years that she said she worked there. However, the addresses she gave, which were on 227 Atlantic Avenue, and then she gave a 2136 Broadway. I'm sorry, I grew up in New York. When you hear Broadway and Atlantic Avenue, those are New York addresses. Those are famous New York streets. And when they tried to confirm her addresses down in Algiers, the people were like, we've been living here for 50 years. We don't know what you're talking about. No Marguerite Oswald ever lived here. So the addresses in Algiers are bad, which means that they had to have been in another city, because those addresses came from her credit report, so they should be valid. But back in the day, they didn't put your city on the credit report address because for privacy reasons. So all you had was the street address. Well, those street addresses are completely valid in New York City. Also, Edwin Ekdahl, the man who she will marry in the next year, just so happens to live just a couple miles north of her on Broadway at the time that I suspect she was in New York, right? So forever, Kennedy researchers have based their theories around Marguerite Oswald on the fact that she lived in certain places. But I'm starting to debunk a lot of the places that they claim that she had lived, because it's obvious if you can't check out an address in one city, then that address is probably located somewhere else. At the exact same time that I put her in New York in 41 to 43, I put Oswald's aunt in New York City with her husband, a guy named James Coker, who just so happened to work for he was in the U.S. Navy, he was in naval intelligence, and he worked for the U.S. government in the Department of Agriculture, where he oversaw commodities markets in agriculture. So he's a big shot in the U.S. government, and he's living in New York City. And all of this is taking place just several blocks from the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which at the time in the early 40s was a hotbed of naval intelligence activity, right? So the stories they tell us about Marguerite Oswald are blatantly false. She was clearly involved in naval intelligence or some sort of naval operations going back to the early 40s, which obviously would have carried through the rest of her life. But none of this stuff is ever addressed by researchers or even speculated on by researchers. But when you really start to dig into the overlaps and the timing, it is brutally obvious that there were two Oswalds living in sometimes two different places, which probably was not part of the plan. And that's where they got tripped up. And when you go back and you read through the Warren Commission testimonies, and you don't look at the answers that people are giving, but you look at the questions that are being asked, how could it possibly be relevant what school Oswald went to in the second grade in regards to how he killed the president? There's no connection at all. It means nothing. It's totally irrelevant. But what's not irrelevant is if the official story of Oswald was never Oswald, which is a lot of what we get. A lot of the story that we get and we're told about Oswald, communism, all of this stuff, a lot of it is just total BS that was seemingly made up after the fact and reinserted into his files or whatnot. So today I want to go through just a handful of slides, because the thing I need to emphasize here is that Armstrong put forth this notion that there were two Oswalds, one who went by Lee Harvey Oswald, who was the real Lee Harvey Oswald, and that there was a second Oswald who went by Harvey Lee Oswald, like a reverse of the names. Now, when you start to do research in Kennedy and you come across, because how often you see the Harvey Lee compared to Lee Harvey in documents is pretty rare. But when you start to look at which documents mention Harvey Lee and how many there are and over what periods of time, it becomes brutally obvious that the use of Harvey Lee Oswald was not accidental in any way, shape, or form. It's part of a conscious pattern of documentation and organization, to the point where researcher Peter Dale Scott, in one of his books, he basically said, this use of Harvey Lee Oswald is not accidental. It is a clear-cut pattern, and it was used as a dual filing system, is how he put it. He put it as a clear-cut dual filing system. But I don't think that's correct. I think it's a clear-cut indicator that there were two Oswalds. They knew there were two Oswalds. And when you look at the behaviors of naval intelligence, CIA, FBI, and you look at like who they went and talked to and the interviews they did and what documents they gathered in the first day, the first 24 to 48 hours after the assassination, it becomes so obvious that they knew way more than anybody else. Like, I'll give you one example. Oswald is alleged to have worked for a guy, the J.R. Michaels Company, I believe it's called, in New Orleans, and he only worked there a couple of days, right, in 1955. Just a couple days, and it didn't work out, so he didn't work there. Nobody in the world, not even his credit report, had any indication of that this job ever existed. However, Hoover personally instructed agents to go to this business and get any paperwork related to Lee Harvey Oswald. So we have a job in 1955 that nobody knows anything about, but J. Edgar Hoover knew about. J. Edgar Hoover knew enough to go send somebody to get the documentation. Even the people who worked there were like, you're crazy. Lee Harvey Oswald didn't work here. And he's like, you want to check these dates. So Hoover knew where, he knew when, and he sent his agents to go get documentation. And they did. They found one piece of paper referencing Lee Harvey Oswald that Hoover knew about that nobody else knew about. Explain that. It's not explainable other than Hoover was in on this dual Oswald scenario going all the way back to the 50s. But ultimately, it started by my calculations in 47. But there are indications that there was something going on prior to 47, which would indicate it couldn't have been the CIA. It had to have been naval intelligence. Right. And then you start to realize the relationships all around these people in the 30s and the 20s and the 40s. They all revolve around naval intelligence, not the CIA, which is weird because I haven't been able to figure out how to meld this relationship. How do you meld the relationship between CIA and naval intelligence? Dulles has to be in the mix. Angleton's in the mix. Frank Wisner has to be in the mix. There's got to be certain key people in CIA who had relationships with naval intelligence that knew about this stuff, and the FBI as well. Like, how the hell would Hoover know about a naval intelligence operation going back to the 30s?
That's what I was thinking. Maybe CIA and naval intelligence had this relationship, things that CIA couldn't necessarily outwardly do. Maybe they pass off to naval intelligence, and they have this inner working relationship.
Well, when you talk to people about like the Lincoln assassination in the 1880s, they will tell you there's body doubles going on in the Lincoln assassination. Like John Wilkes Booth had a body double, like straight up. Like I seen the pictures of the guy. It's straight up a body double. You know what I mean? So there was stuff going on way back in the 1800s with body doubles and things like this. And that was most clearly not CIA, right? Most certainly was before all that. The only people who were actively doing stuff back then was naval intelligence, right? So I think a lot of what they're covering up for is the fact that naval intelligence had been doing weird covert ops for 50 fucking years by the time Oswald was born, right? So for at least the 1800s, they were doing weird shit. And I think some of this weird shit that covert operations back then have shaped American culture since, right? And so I feel like there are some historic events that are possibly fake that never happened, that naval intelligence came up with. And I feel like this is what they're hiding. They're not necessarily hiding Kennedy-related documents. They're hiding the idea that some of this old covert operations shaped who we are as a people. And that's like, what? That's fucked up. That is really fucked up if half the shit we believe is faked by naval intelligence. And I think that's part of what they're kind of colluding about, is that they are covering all that stuff up because they can't let it out that we were doing crazy shit like this way back then, right? We currently assume that the crazy shit started with the CIA and they want to leave it at that. And I think that's part of it. But let me go ahead and I'm going to share some screens specifically in regards to the notion that there was a Lee Harvey Oswald and a Harvey Lee Oswald, because it is important to understand that these are not abstract terms. This is very concrete. These are very concrete things, concrete ideas. And so this set of pictures here that I'm showing you now is the real Lee Harvey Oswald.
And for those listening on the audio end, if you'd like to see the slideshow, please come over to Rumble so you can look at that as well.
Yes, this is something you're most certainly going to tune into the Rumble for, because these pictures are undeniable, basically. To me, I think it's pretty clear that all of these pictures, all 8 pictures here, are of the same person. And obviously, it's going back to Oswald as a child. The second picture here is at Beauregard Junior High School in 1954. You can see Oswald lost a tooth.
Pay attention to the neck.
Right? He's got it. So Oswald lost a tooth back then, and it was replaced. But yet, when Oswald was autopsied and when he was exhumed and dug up and re-autopsied, he had all natural teeth. They didn't show a prosthetic tooth. But we have records of him in the Marines having his prosthetic tooth replaced, right? So you run into all these tiny little instances where things just don't seem to match. The third picture here is of Oswald in the Civil Air Patrol. It's pretty clear that that's Oswald. And it gives us the idea that the Oswald who was in New Orleans post-1962 is not this person here. So when they say Oswald knew David Ferry and he knew him in the Civil Air Patrol and then he knew him in New Orleans, no. This is the real Lee Harvey Oswald who was in the Civil Air Patrol, and the Oswald who we'll call Harvey Oswald was the one who was in New Orleans in 62, 63. So it's two different people. The picture on the right here, this is Oswald graduating from Biloxi from his ground intercept operator course. It's alleged Oswald's a radar operator, but that's false. I can find no evidence that he's a radar operator. He learned basic radar stuff so he could take orders and put marks on the clear board. So when you're in a radar room, you have guys at the radar machines. Then you have a couple guys at these clear boards that have like latitude and longitude and stuff on them. And they would call out certain things and then they would mark it on this board, the clear board. That is the closest I can get to Oswald ever having been in a radar operator capacity. The vast majority of time, he is either on mess duty because he's in trouble or he's on guard duty. I've got multiple people who put him on guard duty, and that's never mentioned anywhere. So the history that we're given of Oswald in the military as him being a radar operator and having secrets about the U-2 and stuff, all blatantly false and easily disprovable. So the picture here on the lower left-hand side, this is the rarest picture of Oswald probably ever. I discovered it in John Armstrong's files, and no one ever really talks about it. But that's the real Lee Harvey Oswald in Atsugi, Japan. You can tell he's a kind of a husky guy. He's got a thicker neck. He's not the skinny waif that was arrested on November 22nd, 1963. The next picture over, this is the picture that they actually used when he defected to the Soviet Union. This clearly indicates a very tall, beefy, 5'11" Lee Harvey Oswald. So the next picture over is Lee Harvey Oswald as indicated by his brother Robert. But the problem with this photograph is Robert has changed the date of this photograph numerous times. He initially said it was in February of 58 when Oswald came and visited him when he was on leave. The problem with that is in February of 1958, this man here, Lee Harvey Oswald, the real Oswald, is in Corregidor, Philippines, and he'll be there until March 18th. Okay, so this was most certainly not taken in February of 58. He then changed the date to December of 58, which I believe is the actual date, December of 58, when Lee Harvey Oswald was on leave again, because we can prove he was on leave at this time, and he was in the States at this time. But then later on, Robert Oswald will change the date again of this photograph, and he'll say it's in September of 1959. And the photograph on the right, the lower right, which is from Oswald's passport, this photograph was taken in September of 59. So these two pictures on the lower right, I'm pretty sure were taken. This was taken in December of 58. This was taken about a year later in September of 59. So, but you can clearly tell all of these are the same person. You don't really have to go out on a limb to say that all of these are the same person. Now, this is Lee Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald. When you skip to the next set of photographs I'm going to show you, it's clear that this is also the same person. All 8 photographs here are clearly the same person. This is clearly not the same person that we know as Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. This is the man who was arrested November 22nd, who we're told is Lee Harvey Oswald, but is clearly not Lee Harvey Oswald. This person is much skinnier, has a much pointier nose. This person almost always had a part on the left side of their hair, whereas when you look at Oswald's photos, the real Oswald, he never had a part. It was always just kind of there, kind of puffy in there. He never had a part on that side, whereas we'll call him Harvey Oswald, and we'll get to the explanation on why he's called Harvey Oswald. He always had a part on the left side, always. And so that's a clear differentiation. And so another thing, this picture here on the upper right-hand side here, this is a very problematic photo. This photograph here on the upper right-hand side is allegedly Lee Harvey Oswald in Corregidor, Philippines. And by his own handwriting, he wrote at the bottom 1957. The problem is that, according to the official records, Lee Harvey Oswald didn't make it to Corregidor until the end of January 1958. So Corregidor causes us a lot of problems, but I think I might have actually figured out what happened. And this is more evidence that there were two Oswalds in the Marine Corps at the exact same time. So I have actually located documentation of a guy named Richard Cyr, CYR, who was in the Marines with Oswald while he was on maneuvers in the Philippines. And he actually names the boat that they were on, that Oswald was on, that Oswald did guard duty. And he did guard duty with Oswald on this boat. This boat is not the name of the boat that we're told. We're told that he was on the Skagit when he went to the Philippines. This boat is not the Skagit. This boat is another boat. I still need to do some more research into it before I reveal that. But it's looking like this Oswald here went from San Diego to San Francisco, jumped right over to Iwakuni, which is the port near Atsugi base in Japan, but never actually got off the boat at Atsugi to be stationed there, which is where he's supposed to be. He actually instead went with this boat to Okinawa and to Corregidor and a couple other places before returning to Atsugi December the 22nd, which to me is perfect timing because the other Oswald, who was initially in the hospital from October 27th to November 15th because he allegedly accidentally shot himself, he was supposed to go on that same run to Okinawa and Corregidor, but because he shot himself in the arm, allegedly accidentally, his trip to those places got put off by 6 weeks. And he ends up going on a boat, the Skagit, to Corregidor and the Philippines and all this stuff. And this is when Martin Schrand, one of the Marines who's out there with Oswald, gets shot to death while on guard duty, allegedly with Oswald, where the initial story is that Oswald had something to do with his killing. Well, Schrand would have been one of 2 or 3 people who could have come in contact with both Oswalds. Clearly, because Schrand was in the graduating, whereas this graduating photo right here in the upper right of the real Lee Harvey Oswald, Schrand was in Lee Harvey Oswald's graduating class. He's photographed just up above him here. But when he gets to Corregidor and he's on guard duty, it appears as though he might have been on guard duty with this other Oswald.
Something else I just noticed, the real Oswald has a much stronger chin than this second one. It's a more pronounced.
Yes, and not only that, yes, and this Oswald here has a dimple in it. He's got like a little, it kind of dips in a little bit, whereas this Oswald does not.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you really come to understand that there were 2 Oswalds, this is what they're fucking hiding. They're not hiding anything with the Kennedy assassination. Don't expect to get some smoking gun fucking documents from the government. It's never going to happen. What they're hiding is Oswald's tax records, Marguerite's tax records, Robert Oswald's tax records. You know why they're hiding Robert Oswald's tax records? Because Robert Oswald was in on this and he lived with both the real Oswald and the fake Oswald at different times. He's photographed he's at the funeral where Oswald is buried, and he told his other brother, John Pick, who was related to the original Oswald, he told him, don't come to the funeral. He straight up said, don't come to the funeral. Why? Because he would have gotten there and seen that the Marguerite Oswald who was there was not his mother. When you get into, let me just read this before we get into some of the stuff I want to show. This is statements from John Pick when he was on the talking to Jenner of the Warren Commission. Okay, so this picture on the left is a picture of Harvey Oswald at the Bronx Zoo in 1953. It could have been 52, 53, around that time. But Jenner asked Pick, he says, then right below is a picture of a young man standing in front of an iron fence, which appears at the Bronx Zoo. Do you recognize that? And John Pick, who's Oswald's real half brother, he says, sir, from that picture, I could not recognize that as Lee Harvey Oswald. That young fellow shown here, he doesn't look like you recall Lee in 1952 and 1953 as you saw him in New York City. No, sir. Commission Exhibit 284, do you recognize anybody in that picture that appears to be Lee Oswald? Again, no, sir. So he's showing him pictures of Oswald, and he's like, I can't recognize him. And then he asks him here, he goes, all right. He's like, look at Exhibit 286 in the lower right-hand corner. There's another picture. Do you recognize that as your brother Lee in that picture? And he goes, yes, sir. That's about how he looked when I seen him in 1962. Now, 1962 is wild because Thanksgiving 1962, they actually had dinner. I believe it was in New Orleans. John Pick was there, but the other Oswald was there, not his brother. Harvey Oswald was there, who he had never known or met in his life. Okay? So Harvey Oswald is there at dinner, and he's got his wife Marina and Lillian Moretz there, Dorothea Moretz there, Basically, the whole family from New Orleans is there, but they got the fake
So
brother.
do you think the two
Okay?
real brothers were separated at some time? Did they know each other, do you think?
Well, here's the thing. By the time that they started to introduce the other Oswald, they were living separately. And then within a couple years, John Pick goes off to join the Coast Guard. So he's out of the picture. So he doesn't ever interact with that Oswald. He doesn't see Oswald really from about 1949 until 1952 in August. In August 52, you've got Oswald and his mother show up and they stay with John Pick in New York. So it's obviously the real Oswald. Right? This is August of 52. However, this past week, I just discovered school records where Oswald is still attending school in September of 52. So we've got even more overlap. And John Armstrong didn't catch that one, which is awesome because I did. So we've got this weird overlap of things. But then you've got John Pick is obviously out of the picture. He doesn't know what's going on. He must have been debriefed sometimes afterwards when he started to see his mother on TV, who clearly was not his mother. The CIA had to step in and be like, look, this is the deal. This is what's happening. And be like, now, if you tell anybody, we're going to fucking kill you. Right. So that conversation had to happen at some point. But this here, even as a picture of as a child, John Pick is saying that's not my brother. Now, let me skip to evidence of the official use of Harvey and Lee. This, I think, is the most important thing. And after a couple slides, you're going to feel like I'm beating a dead horse. But this dead horse needs to be beat into your head more than anything else. You need to understand. The government knew there were two Oswalds. They knew it from day one. Hoover was in on this whole thing. And Hoover had files on the Oswald family, particularly Floy Oswald and her husband, who was William Brown. They had super duper top secret files that were indicated with the number 67 as a file starter. Those were 67. I'm sure you've heard Hoover maintained private files on people. Those were his 67 files. And he had a 67 file on Oswald's aunt and uncle. Why? Who knows? But the first document we'll look at is the roster of employees at the Texas School Book Depository. The first name on the list is Harvey Lee Oswald. Now, this is weird because the only address that I know that he ever gave them was the address at the Payne's residence when he filled out the job application. But let's be real. Oswald never filled out a job application for this place. The handwriting doesn't match. And it was obviously a front job, just like all his other front jobs. And all his other front jobs had connections to the CIA, like Riley Coffey, Jagger's Charles Stovall, which developed the U-2 photos. I mean, how is a guy who defected to the Soviet Union going to get a top secret clearance to work in some of these places? He's not, right? But the Texas School Book Depository had on file Harvey Lee Oswald, not Lee Harvey Oswald. Let's go to the next one, documentation of the census of 1950. The Consolidated Census Report clearly has Harvey Oswald, not Lee Harvey Oswald. And we know this is the same person because the father or guardian's name is Marguerite Ekdahl, which was the name she had when she was married to Edwin Ekdahl. Next one, the document where the application that had to be filled out for the Marine Corps. You can clearly see it was filled out Harvey Lee Oswald and then erased and then refilled out Lee Harvey Oswald. It was almost as if it was corrected. And then on this is kind of funny because Oswald had blue eyes, so blue they were pale. But on here it says he has hazel eyes, which he never had hazel eyes. So whoever filled this out doesn't know the statistics for the real Lee Harvey Oswald, which being this is back in the 50s, it's definitely Harvey Oswald who filled this out. When Marguerite Oswald filed for Oswald's dependency discharge from the Marines, right? Because Oswald, there's so much complication and contradiction around Oswald's discharge. We're not even going to get to that today, but when you look at the discharge paperwork that was filled out by Marguerite Oswald, she puts Harvey Lee Oswald, not Lee Harvey Oswald, on the actual official documentation. Also, for Robert E. Lee Oswald, who was the father of Oswald, she puts date of birth not known. She should have known that. It's pretty simple. All right, so Lee Harvey Oswald had a file that was maintained by Naval Intelligence, or the Defense Intelligence Agency, I should say, under the name Harvey Lee Oswald, and Harold Weisberg located a reference to this file, but when he requested copies of the file, they said they don't know what he's talking about. Billy Joe Lord. Billy Joe Lord was the guy who was on the boat with Oswald when Oswald went to the Soviet Union. He took a boat to Le Havre, France. Then he hopped over to the UK. Then he went to Helsinki, Finland, and then he went to Moscow. So Billy Joe Lord just so happened to be another Marine guy or Navy guy on the boat Everybody there was only 4 passengers on this ship because it was really not a passenger ship. So they had 4 passengers on it. All of them were in the Marines or the Navy, right? Not coincidence. Billy Joe Lord continually referred to Oswald as Harvey Lee Oswald when he was being questioned. Okay, so here we have FBI reports talking about Jack Leon Ruby, a couple other things. Numerous references to Harvey Lee Oswald, not Lee Harvey Oswald, in the document. Garrison and Bill Boxley. This is great because, Garrison wanted to get to the truth. He's the only person in the whole world you can say honestly wanted to know the truth and went out of his way and didn't promote anything that was bullshit. Okay. He has a conversation with Bill Boxley, and Bill Boxley is like, yeah, these guys never referred to him as Lee Harvey Oswald at the FBI. They always refer to him as Harvey Lee Oswald. And he got this from a guy who told him that 3 people who worked for various desks at the CIA ended up dead. People who worked at the Bulgarian desk, the Hungarian desk, and the Yugoslav desk for the CIA all turned up dead, which is weird because that indicates that the real Oswald is from one of these Eastern Bloc countries, which I've always kind of said. The weird thing is that he looks so familiar to the other Oswald that it was almost like he has to be related, right? So how can you have somebody who's related but yet born in an Eastern Bloc country and speaks Russian? Because you have to have somebody who's an Oswald who's overseas in the military at the time, right? That's basically how I'm thinking of it. I'm thinking of one of Oswald's relatives on either side of the family popped out this kid over in fucking Eastern Bloc, Soviet Union country sometime in the 1930s. I don't understand it. I'm still working on it. So here we go. So now we have Jim Garrison. He references in this memo from Louis Ivan. They openly discuss the fact that Oswald was being impersonated. So here it says, medical examinations in September 1959 in the service. His height was 71 inches and his weight was 150 pounds, hair brown, eyes gray. His build is given as medium rather than slender, which it should have been. The examination was on his release from active duty. This 5'11" Marine then went on and got a passport, which said his height is 5'11", but he shows up in Russia and has pictures taken with Marina, who's a little girl just over 5 foot tall. And his pictures do not show him towering over her as if he were the same person who had been in the Marines. Priscilla Johnson, the newspaper woman who interviewed Lee Harvey Oswald, reports him as 5'11" with brown hair and gray eyes. But it's interesting that the taller Oswald is gray-eyed and the shorter one has blue eyes. This is a pretty consistent pattern through the descriptions. Marguerite describes her son as blue-eyed, as having a light brown wavy hair, and Oswald, who entered the United States at New York, was only 5'6". He couldn't possibly be 5'11", even allowing for a couple inches of mistake, right? So that's another thing. When you look at all the pictures of Oswald in Russia, which I have not even touched him in Russia yet, I don't want to yet. That's going to take up a whole nother couple year chunk of my life. But the Oswald in Russia is photographed, and he looks like he's about 5'6". His paperwork indicates he's about 5'6". And on his paperwork in Russia, I might even have the document coming up here. When he applied for citizenship in Russia, he applied under the name Harvey Lee Oswald, not Lee Harvey Oswald. And he gave a birth date of October the 19th, not October the 18th, which it really is, which is a whole nother section of slides I have, because Oswald's own mother gave the wrong birth date of October 19th on more than a dozen occasions. So here we have another document from Naval Intelligence. It's titled Harvey Lee Oswald. Here we have another FBI report concerning Harvey Lee Oswald. The funny thing about a lot of these documents is they'll have, like here, the title is Travel of Harvey Lee Oswald. But then you'll get into it and it'll specifically say Lee Harvey Oswald inside of the report body, right? So why do they do that? It's clearly intentional. It's not an accident. You're not allowed to make accidents in reports when you work for the FBI, right? So it's clearly intentional. Here we have another Naval Intelligence document referencing the DCI, the Department of Covert Intelligence, titled, and this is in April 5 of 72, almost 10 years after the assassination, subject Harvey Lee Oswald. All these subjects coming up Harvey Lee Oswald, not the reverse, are on purpose because they knew.
Do you think these guys, Harvey Lee and Lee Harvey, were actual brothers?
I think so. It has to have been. There's no way around it. I mean, and if he wasn't born in some Eastern Bloc country, he could have easily just been raised to speak Russian as a child. I mean, that's just, he could have been stuck with because we don't know anything about him until 47, at which point he's 8 years old. He could have been living with a Russian-speaking person that entire time, learning both languages the whole time. See, that's the whole idea of a legend. A legend is a false background that you create for a spy. So when if he's caught, interrogated, investigated, The legend is what they find. They find the fake backstory. And in the modern era, you can just fake that in a computer. You can fake birth records. You can fake IDs. You can do all that. They couldn't do that in 47. In 47, they had to come up. They were still thinking through, how do you do this? How do you come up with fake backstories? So to me, this is as much as an experiment as just a covert operation. You know what I mean?
Right.
Here we go. More documents referencing Harvey Lee Oswald from the FBI. The ARB, which is the Assassination Record Review Board, Doug Horn did great work with the ARB. If you're interested in the ARB's work, they basically went to great lengths to determine if the CIA maintained a file in Mexico City under the name Harvey Lee Oswald, specifically Harvey Lee Oswald. After like a year of research, Doug Horn determined that they did not, but of course they did. Oswald's Russian documents contain the name Harvey Lee Oswald. So almost as an indicator. But then again, you have other documents in Russia where the name on it is Alexei Oswald. So he came up with a whole nother name and persona when he was in Russia, which I haven't even touched yet. John Elrod, who is an associate of Jack Ruby in Dallas, he apparently knew this person, and he called him Harvey Lee Oswald when they talked about it in interrogation. J.C. Day of the Identification Bureau, Dallas Police Department, when he testified before the Warren Commission, he used both names. He used Harvey Lee Oswald and Lee Harvey Oswald. At this point, you think they'd know which is correct, right? And they wouldn't refer to the other one. They keep referring to the other one because, just like Peter Dale Scott said, it was a dual filing system. But to me, a dual filing system represents two people. More checks here, more documents showing checks under the name Harvey Lee. Michael Hardin of the O'Neill Funeral Home, when he testified about the death of Oswald, because he was the one who collected the body, he testified to the name of Harvey Lee Oswald, not the other way around. Earlene Roberts, who was the manager at 1026 North Beckley. Remember, 1026 North Beckley, Oswald never lived there. Kerry Thornley lived there. But when the cops came around looking for Oswald, they did not ask for Lee Harvey Oswald. They didn't ask for O.H. Lee, which they should have if that was the name he was allegedly using. They asked for Harvey Lee. Harvey Lee Oswald was the name the cops specifically were asking for when they showed up at the boarding house. Here we have another report, and this one's kind of important because it's got a heading that says Harvey Lee Oswald, a.k.a. ISR Cuba. Now, the ISR Cuba is Internal Security Russia Cuba. That's what that stands for. And there's a whole slew of files that are grouped together under that heading. This is the only one I could find that was referenced Harvey Lee Oswald, not Lee Harvey Oswald. Here we go. We have a Secret Service memo, January 24th, 64, subject Harvey Lee Oswald, not Lee Harvey Oswald. Then we have a telegram to Marguerite Oswald after the fact, someone who knew Oswald. They sent her a telegram referencing Harvey Lee Oswald, not Lee Harvey. And then we get to the HSCA records request. They requested names from all agencies under the name both Lee Harvey Oswald and Harvey Lee Oswald. So I hope you should see by now, this is a pattern. This is not accidents. This is not mistakes. This is all intentional. Clay Shaw, during a press conference after his arrest in 67, he referred to Oswald as Harvey Lee Oswald, not Lee Harvey Oswald. And he shouldn't have known either name, but he still referred to him as Harvey Lee, which to me indicates that Clay Shaw might have actually known this person. All right, Soviet citizenship requested under the name Harvey Lee Oswald, not Lee Harvey. Then we have another CIA document. This one I'm going to read a paragraph from because it's fascinating. This is from a guy named Thomas B. Kasasin, and his name pops up in some of the research. I need to dig back into some of his stuff that he said. But he talks about two programs here. He talks about Redwood, which fell under the Red Skin program, which I talk about in my book. And he talks about AE Ocean, which fell under the AE Balcony program, which I talk about in my book. Because I determined that Oswald was part of these two programs. Then I find this document after the fact by Thomas Kasasin, which confirms that. But he also confirms the name Harvey Oswald was the one they were interested in. So, addendum, he says, as an afterthought, I recall also at the time I was becoming increasingly interested in watching develop a pattern that we had discovered in the course of our bio and research work. In the number of Soviet women marrying foreigners, being permitted to leave the USSR, then eventually divorcing their spouses and settling down abroad without returning home. The AE Ocean 3 case was among the first of these, and we eventually turned up something like 24 similar cases. We established links between some of these women and the KGB. KU Desk became interested, that's the FBI, became interested in the developing trend we'd come across It was partly out of curiosity to learn if Oswald's wife would actually accompany him to our country, partly out of interest in Oswald's own experience in the USSR, that we showed operational intelligence interest in the Harvey story.
Interesting.
So they're talking about Lee Harvey Oswald, but then they have operational interest in the Harvey story. What the fuck is he talking about? Harvey story. This is a guy who was in the CIA. Okay, so that's wild to me. That's totally confirmation of they knew about Harvey Oswald separate from Lee Oswald, and he was being observed by the AE Ocean program. That's to me is incredible. All right, so here we have more documentation of FBI requests under the name Harvey Lee Oswald. Then we have a weird story about a guy named Robert Tabor, who was the founder of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Allegedly, he was witnessed down in Cuba with a guy who he introduced to somebody as Lieutenant Harvey Oswald. This story, I don't have enough information to believe this story yet, and I don't believe Robert Tabor would have been talking Fair Play for Cuba Committee stuff overtly when he was a covert founder of it. So this story, I believe, is kind of wishy-washy. All right, so when the initial announcement is made that J.D. Tippit has been killed in Oak Cliff, they announced it was Harvey Lee Oswald was the suspect, not Lee Harvey, Harvey Lee. This is an interesting one. So according to Mrs. John D. Kilgore, Oswald had worked at Bilbo Trucking with her husband. This is not on any record anywhere, period. In 1956, Oswald didn't have a driver's license. So she had met him once in 1956 when her husband brought him home. She says this man was known to them as Harvey Oswald. According to John, he would see Oswald picking up a paycheck frequently. However, he never actually saw Oswald work any days. The problem here is that this is in 1956. However, it has become apparent to me that Oswald's brother, Robert Oswald, used the name Lee Oswald as he was growing up and as he was in the Marines. So when I see incidents like this going back to before it could have been Lee Harvey Oswald, but kind of close, to me, this is an example of Robert Oswald impersonating his brother and using the name Harvey Oswald. So this adds a layer of mystery and complication to the whole thing. Yes, right? And so then you have like newspaper articles stretching into the 1970s. Okay, come on. You going to tell me newspaper people are getting the name wrong? No. The name Harvey Lee Oswald was used well into the latest one I think I found was in like 74 or something like that. But we have got dozens and dozens of articles referencing Harvey Lee Oswald, not Lee Harvey Oswald, going all the way back to the 60s and 70s, right? Tons of them. Harvey Lee Oswald everywhere. William Gaudet, who I believed was one of Oswald's, not handlers, but was meant to keep an eye on Oswald, and he was the guy who bought who got his visa to Mexico like right before Oswald did. The numbers were consecutive, right? This guy, when he was interviewed by Bud Fensterwald, he continually referred to Oswald as Harvey Oswald, not Lee Oswald.
Why do you think all these newspapers and media outlets would be intentionally using Harvey Oswald instead of Lee Harvey?
I don't know. Maybe that's information they were indirectly fed. Maybe it's... I just don't know. I can't answer that. Here's another good one. This is a CIA memo, and it's dated June 10th of 1960. Says there is attached a copy of FBI Memorandum Washington, February 27, 61, concerning the subject. A copy of a June 3rd memorandum was furnished under the reference. It is requested that the recipients advise if the FBI receiving any information about Harvey on a continuing basis. If not, please furnish this office with information which has not been provided to the FBI so it can be forwarded. And this is actually dated March 2nd, 61. March 2nd, 61 is at a time when Oswald's in the Soviet Union. And they're looking for information on Harvey, probably because they got word that all the Russian paperwork was done in the name Harvey Oswald, not Lee Oswald. George de Mohrenschildt, who allegedly knew this person very well, he was clearly a CIA handler of Oswald, he repeatedly referred to him as Harvey Lee Oswald in his interrogation. All right, so to me, this is the most damning one, and we'll wrap this up here momentarily. When John Pick met with this Oswald on Thanksgiving of 1962, Oswald put his name in John Pick's address book, and he put it in and signed the name Harvey. He didn't put the name Lee. He put the name Harvey. And remember, John Pick had never met this guy before. And when he talks to the Warren Commission and he talks to the HSCA and he talks to all these people, he makes it very clear that this person was not my brother. Sorry. Then when you go through various articles that have come over the years, the idea that there were two Oswalds is absolutely nothing new. It's nothing I've come up with. It is nothing groundbreaking. It is something that some of the newspapers and some of the magazines and some of the assassination newsletters that came out, they were all discussing this. Was there several Oswalds? Recently declassified documents reveal that the multiple Oswald theory was taken very seriously by the same men who publicly dismissed it as a joke, the members of the Warren Commission, right? So when you I'm telling you, when you go back and you reread Warren Commission questioning of people who knew Oswald back in the day, their questioning is entirely based around the two Oswalds. They're verifying that these people didn't know two Oswalds or did know two Oswalds, and they're making a very distinct categorization of people who knew one, neither, or both. It becomes very obvious when you start to when they're asking Oswald's babysitter in the 3rd grade about his behavior. What does that have to do with the killing of the president? Nothing at all. But it has much to do about the temperament of the person who is alleged to have been Oswald at that time. And like I said, the first anomaly starts in 47 with the address at 101 San Saba in Benbrook, Texas. That's where it all starts.
I wonder if there's
here we go. We have even more
a Harvey around. If the one that didn't get it pinned on as a patsy is drinking Mai Tais on some island somewhere, or at least was.
Well, Armstrong believed that he went off and became a guy named Donald O. Norton, Donald Orestes Norton, and he's got hundreds of pages of documents on this guy. That's still on my to-do list, but basically, long story short, in the 1970s, Mae Brussels, who was like the biggest Kennedy researcher back in the 60s, she had been getting these anonymous donations from a guy named Donald Norton. And then Donald Norton shows up and then says, hey, I'm the guy who's been giving you all this money. And so she goes and she has dinner with him, and there's another guy with them. And both of these people said this guy was a spitting image of Lee Harvey Oswald. And so John Armstrong spent many a long night researching Donald O. Norton to see if Norton was the original Lee Harvey Oswald. And the weird thing about the cover story of Donald O. Norton is that Donald O. Norton has a real family, right? Like a legitimate family with brothers, sisters, cousins, uncles, all this stuff. And so the idea is that Oswald was inserted into this family as Donald O. Norton. Maybe Donald O. Norton died or something. Maybe Donald O. Norton went off into some other project. But the idea is that he was inserted into this family, just like the duplicate was inserted into Oswald's family, right? Like there's a network of these families involved with covert operations who are on the inside with this, person swapping for identity purposes, right?
Crazy.
So it is crazy. And this is what they're fucking hiding. This is what they're hiding. They're not hiding anything to do with the assassination. They're hiding this stuff. This is what they're really hiding. So this is great. This is from Peter Dale Scott, and this will wrap up this series of slides. It says, in addition, at least one of these G2 records listed Oswald by a slightly different name. This alternate name, which eventually was used by at least 4 different military intelligence sources, was Harvey Lee Oswald. This Harvey Lee Oswald reference is no accidental anomaly, but part of an organized pattern widely dispersed that suggests an official intelligence deception and possible dual filing system. Serial 02296E of 27 June 60 is the earliest Harvey Lee Oswald reference we now possess over 24 from the files of ONI, FBI, CIA, Army Intelligence, the Secret Service, the Mexican Secret Police, and the Dallas Police. A consistent pattern of behavior in these agencies since the assassination has been the tendency to suppress references to Harvey Lee Oswald and replace them by the more standard Lee Harvey Oswald. And this isn't Armstrong. This is Peter Dale Scott, one of the more well-respected researchers out there. So you can go ahead and end screen share.
Right on. All right.
But yes, ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, I know a lot of this is very new to you, but I've been on this I've been on Kennedy for years, but I've been on this specific Oswald thing for the last 3-4 months or so. And I'm 100% absolutely, it's not even about being convinced. The evidence clearly indicates there were 2 Oswalds all throughout the time that Oswald was growing up. And one of the things about Kennedy researchers in general, besides the fact I dislike them greatly because they never solve anything, is that most of them will discredit a lot of this information for with no cause at all. And when you start to look at the number of incidents going back to 47, stretching through his time in the Marines, through his time in the Soviet Union, really up until about the time he comes home, June of 62, there's nothing but contradiction in Oswald's life schedule, descriptions of him, everything. It's clear Oswald was part of some sort of experiment going back to, pre-Cold War. This has to have been a remnant of the old naval intelligence, getting with the CIA and the FBI to work out some sort of experimental operation, which is exactly what I think this was. And I think that they thought that by pinning the assassination on him, they would be able to tie up a whole bunch of loose ends. That was the greatest mistake they ever made, because all it did was bring everything they did into the spotlight.
Right on. So this is so fascinating, man. Before you go, what are your plans for research direction? Any new updates that you'll be working on?
Well, the next thing I'm doing is I've already got about 400 slides put together on this, and I'm trying to keep it narrowed down, but it just keeps growing. I'll have 500 or 600 slides by the time it's all said and done. And from that, I believe you and I are going to put together our documentary.
Right on.
And we'll pull from my other slide collection too. And then once we get that done, then I'll start worrying about the next book, because I was going to do the next book on Israel and stuff, but this stuff is way too fascinating for me. I'm way too compelled by this information. So this will be at least the foundation of the next book. And correcting Armstrong, because Armstrong made a lot of mistakes on his Harvey and Lee stuff. So I feel like I have to correct the record on his work, as well as show the developments that I've made in the same area.
Right on. Well, before we close out, let everyone know how they can get a hold of your book, your Substack, all the good stuff.
Sure. So this is my book right here. It's A Warning from History. This book right here is the nuts and bolts of what happened to John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. John F. Kennedy was killed by the largest conspiracy the world has ever known. And it's all detailed in that book. You can get it on Amazon. Right now, my website is being rebuilt, so there's nothing really there, but you want to go check out Bloody History, which is my podcast, and bloodyhistory.substack.com, which is my World War II Substack.
Excellent. Right on. Well, we'll be definitely talking again in the future. And until next time, everyone, have a wonderful evening and Merry Christmas. We will see you again in a few days. We live in an incredible age of information. More and more, we're discovering that we've been lied to and misled about much of our human history. Cory Hughes is providing profound revelations about World War I, World War II, the JFK assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination, and much, much more on his new Substack, Bloody History. Subscribe now for as little as $5 monthly. Just click that link right in the description to get started now and learn about our true history. Hello friends, are you struggling to lose weight and keep it off? Have you tried intermittent fasting, low carb or ketogenic diets, cutting calories and exercising more with no success? Book a free intro call with my friend Christian Yordanov to see how he can help you. He is a health author and functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. He was on the show recently to discuss his latest book on longevity, How to Actually Live Longer, Volume 1. He understands that for many people, excess weight gain and weight loss resistance is much more complex than calories in, calories out. You may be having a hard time shedding the pounds because of hormonal and metabolic imbalances that won't respond to simply eating less and moving more. In our modern environment full of obesogenic chemicals and endocrine disruptors, xenoestrogens, and persistent organic pollutants, as well as unprecedented levels of stress, a more sophisticated approach is needed to help people like yourself achieve long-lasting results. Christian's going to help you lose weight in a safe, sustainable, and stress-free manner. He doesn't use severe calorie restriction, low-carb or ketogenic diets, intermittent or water fasting, or intense exercise regimens with his clients. Instead, his focus is on improving diet quality, addressing hormonal and metabolic imbalances, reducing stress, and helping you build the habits and lifestyle that will allow you to achieve your body composition goals and transform your health. In addition, he's going to help you boost your detoxification system because this is critical to get right before you start losing a significant amount of weight. Christian will help you get healthy to lose weight. That is the right way to do it. This is not a quick fix, but a comprehensive strategy that'll help you achieve your desired body composition in a safe, free, and stress-free manner. If you are done with the fat diets and intermittent starvation and are ready for real solutions, the support you need is available. Click that link in the description to learn more and book your free call with Christian to see how he can help you. Make sure you mention FKN when booking, and he will add extra free consultation sessions to your package.